Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Deadhead Cannabis Show. I'm Larry Mishkin, Mishkin Law in Chicago, and I am joined today by my co-host, Rob Hunt, who is joining us from somewhere out in ski country, USA, that he can tell you all about because he's going to reap the benefits of that big, huge snowstorm that's blowing through. Our producer, Dan Humiston, is out on the East Coast for a change, so he's everywhere, and very excited you guys could join us for the first show of 2022 of the Deadhead Cannabis Show. It's going to be a slightly new format because those of you who were listening last week know that Jim Marty, who was my original co-host on the show from Longmont, Colorado, said his goodbyes as he retires and heads off into the lovely sunset of somewhere in Nevada. So the best to Jim. I'm sure we'll hear from him from time to time as he makes his way to shows and is always happy to share his thoughts and opinions with us. But for now, it's Rob and I, and we will always have Dan by our side. We're very excited and glad everyone's joining us. Rob, how are you? Happy New Year, and good to see you, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. Super stoked to be here. It's ski country like that. It's always ski. It's almost 5 months, the next 5 days. Actually, the next 11 days. And it's just absolutely crushing the snow out here right now. So this is the West, I can tell you. It's not just the inside of California. It's just getting hammered as well. Europe's getting hammered. British Columbia's getting hammered. It's been a great year for skiing. Hopefully things will go rest out here in California. And on the way out here, I actually got to pass through lovely Mesquite, Nevada, which will be the future home of Jim Marty. So not too far, from me. So anytime I drive to Utah from here on in, I get to either roll my window down and just yell for him, or stop by and grab beer with him. So happy New Year to you as well, Larry. As everyone knows, we record this show a couple days before it actually airs. So by the time this airs, it'll be Happy New Year to everyone out there. But maybe we should kick it off and talk about, kind of the announcement that happened yesterday with respect to Fish. Obviously not playing New Year's at Madison Square Garden, but they threw a pretty big surprise curveball our way, huh, Larry?
Look, it's true, and thank you, audience, for being patient with us because, of course, as we sit here talking about it right now, it's all brand new. We have no idea what they're going to actually do, and when you're listening to this, you will have heard it. But it's great news to hear. Unfortunately, right, they had to cancel their New York shows. My son, who had his tickets, is very, very bummed out, and I understand. And sorry about that, Matthew. I hope, things get better and you'll get to see him in April, so all will be good. But they've thrown their fans a bone, and as part of their not traditional, but I guess it has been now since COVID hit, their dinner and a movie theme, they're going to do one on New Year's Eve. And what I love is, instead of going back and finding an old show, they're playing live. They're going to play 3 sets from some studio that they have, and it's going to be broadcast Friday evening as part of the Fish station on FX, Sirius FX XM or whatever it's called. And also on Fish, I think it's on Nugsnet or one of those sites, but you can find it very easily, I'm sure. And it's going to be great. You're going to be able to hear them play an entire show of music live as it's happening, which quite frankly I think is absolutely fantastic. I've never heard of anything like that. It's always been, unless they were actually playing a show and they were broadcasting it, right? But otherwise you would typically, well, sorry, we can't be here. We're just going to fill in with a taped show. But this is going to be something else. Have you ever seen anything like this, Rob?
No, but it's right in line with like sort of the Fish mantra of whatever it takes. You think about what they did during COVID earlier with the Beacon and with the dinner and the movies. Look, when these guys can't play, they play, right? So it's amazing to me that they go, okay, we have to shut it down. Omicron's ravaging New York City right now. So what do we do? Everyone's bought tickets. We've rescheduled to 420 now. Most people are going to be able to reschedule their show dates. But for anyone that's like planning on ringing in the new year and was kind of bummed that there's no Fish and no couch tour, here's the perfect solution that only those guys could pull off so seamlessly, where they're going to simulcast it on Sirius, simulcast on YouTube, and on Fish FM, which is millions of people are going to tune into the show now, which I think is just a really great way to say thank you to the fans. Like, sorry, we weren't expecting this, you weren't expecting it, but here we go. The show must go on, and I'm stoked. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, I do too. And for a lot of people like my son now who had tickets to the show and were faced with the real dilemma of what do I do? Do I, keep my tickets to go to the show, or do I take this once and who knows when it'll ever happen again to watch Michigan play in the college football playoffs? Well, now he can do both, right? And I think the game plan is going to be to watch the game with the Fish concert as the background. And, not unlike when people play Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon with the color portion of The Wizard of Oz, right? And they look for all the matchups to show that it's really connected. I'm just wondering how often it'll be that we'll see a peak play on the field by one of the teams, corresponding with, a really, really hot musical peak, and whether they'll be able to play off that karma with one another and create something. But either way, I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and my hat's off to Fish for doing it. I think it's a great gesture, and God bless them for taking the time to play, a whole show. What a great thing.
Well, all I know is I'm super fired up about New Year's. Really fired up about how this entire year has gone for this show and for this program. So to Larry and to Jim also, and definitely to Dan Humiston, and to all our fans out there, guys, you've gotten us really excited about doing this show. We've watched our numbers and our listenership go up over the last couple months, to a point now where Larry and I sort of joke about, like, wow, people are actually tuning in. So we say it once in a while, but thank you to all our listeners for a great 2021, and we're really, really stoked about what we can do in 2022. So for everyone that's out there, thank you for a great year and for really making it fun for us to get into the studio and do this every week for you guys.
Absolutely, I couldn't have said it better myself. We're nowhere without our listeners, and I still get a kick out of the fact that anybody's interested in anything I have to say about anything. Of course, that's just conditioning from my wonderful boys at home who love me dearly, I'm sure. But nevertheless, this has been great. And while I was, very sorry, I think we all were for, to see Jim go, and the element that he takes out of the show. Again, this is a guy who was there at the very beginning of time, practically, when marijuana was just finally sticking its head out of the closet and saying, we can be legal and we can operate in a way where people can smoke and not go to jail. And to lose anybody like that is always a tough blow. But luckily, we have Rob Hunt, who's been with us long enough now that he's as much part of the show as Jim and I. We've got Dan still calling the shots from behind the scene and keeping us honest. And, thank God. What a great topic. There's always going to be a million dead shows to talk about. I've seen the T-shirt, so I know the number. What is it, 2,000 and something, 500 dead shows or whatever. We've got plenty of time before we get close to running out of topics to talk about there. And even as you'll hear today from some of the music we're going to play from a show that we found we really like, there's some really fun stuff there. So actually, really quickly, we do have a show today. It's from January 3rd, 1970. So that parks it out at 52 years. And it's actually an interesting show because it's played in New York at the Fillmore. And as we'll talk more about later when we get into the show, they happen to be out there because it's the only time in their history when they do a New Year's show somewhere other than the Bay Area. They played in the Boston Tea Party for a couple of nights over New Year's and then go to New York. The show from the night before, January 2nd, was released as Dave's Picks number 30, and a little bit of a portion of the show that we're going to play for you is filler material on that, but you can go find this online at Archive or wherever, and it's really, really great. So here's the intro for us, the first little bit of music that we're going to share from January 3rd, 1970 at the Fillmore East.
Spanish lady come to me, she lays on me this rug. You let the fire around and round, and tremble and explode. Let the smoking crater of my mind, I like to blown away. With a heat come round and busted me for smiling on a cloudy day. Coming, coming, coming all round, coming around. Coming all round, coming around, coming, coming all round, coming around, coming all round, coming around.
Lots of good stuff to talk about there, Rob.
I gotta say, I love the early '70s, other ones, because in my mind, Neil's still there. Like, Neil Cassidy's still there. So when you actually have a song that's written about you, I mean, it's bad enough the guy had a book written about him on the road, but the fact that he also has the years with Kesey, and then has a song written about him by the Grateful Dead. That's true psychedelia, I think, as far as the early '70s. Everyone gives Dark Star all the praise, but the other one during that period was just straight fire.
I agree. It's always wonderful, and it was always a pleasure to hear it, no matter when. But back there, yeah, I mean, you hear their voices so young and so, strong and really belting out the lyrics and playing it. And it's funny because here they are in 1970 belting out the lyrics. And, Bob's lyric is what? That the heat came by and busted me for smiling on it. That just happened the year before. It was like brand new.
It's one of my favorite lines. Yeah, it's absolutely one of my favorite lines the Grateful Dead play. Just, sort of summing up, just keeping me down for who I am.
Yep. No, I love that. I love that line. I love how it got worked into that tune. And, I mean, that had just happened. And here they are within a year of that. It's in the song. It's being played. And it's wonderful. It's just great to hear that. And we'll be circling back around to that show in a few minutes because there's going to be a lot of good stuff to talk about that. But just
you're referring to the busted 710 Ashbury, though, right?
Yes. Well, not the one where the story where he was up in the attic and he threw a water balloon down and hit a cop. And then he came downstairs and the cops were all trying to figure out who the hell had done it. And he sits down on the curb with a goofy grin on his face. So they came up and decided he threw the balloon and they arrested him for public disorder or whatever the charge was. And his telling of it is he got busted. He was sitting around, came by and busted me for smiling on a cloudy day. So if I ever get a chance to interview him, that's guilty or innocent. I want to know.
It's such a great story, isn't it?
It really is. And that's the beauty of Bob Weir. That could only be Bob Weir. That would never be Jerry. That wouldn't be Pigpen. Phil wouldn't be doing that kind of nonsense. That's Bob Weir. That's what he did. And, it inspired wonderful moments in Grateful Dead songs.
Yeah, and I love the way that song evolved over the years. I love the way it started dropping in the massive fill bombs. I love in the late 80s, all the distortion going into the second verse where, Dan Healy would just mix it up where, if you were high in that audience, it was sometimes frightening how distorted it got.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. They would definitely have some fun with that. And, yeah, you're right. It could really make, I suppose, or break your evening under the circumstances. But typically it was all for the good. And, it was we'll talk, right? It's just such a great tune that, here it is 40, 50 years later, and you could still, hear them play it, at least up till the very end, with pretty much the same vibrancy and the same, Bobby always jumping right into it and loving it. And Phil, as you say, with those wonderful bass bombs. What a great tune. Yep.
I think that and The Wheel were consistently always my favorite songs coming out of space.
I would agree. Because, yeah, I mean, without Cryptical, and when they just, mostly played just the other one for our generation, somewhere in the middle of space, you would start hearing it, right? They threw out just one or two little notes, but those of us who knew what we were looking for heard it. And then you're just, okay, it's going to be the other one. Go take a piss. You got 10 minutes. Let's go. Right? And then boom, all of a sudden, right on target, they, like you say, just roll into it like that and boom.
Yeah,
right. That was the key.
Get back before the bomb.
And off they'd go. What a great song. What a great way to just launch out in the second set or wherever it was when you would hear it. But it's wonderful. Just quickly, some marijuana stuff, because why not? We are the Deadhead Cannabis Show, so we never want to drop that side of things. And, there are a few interesting things going on in this industry right now, as is typically the case. We've got a few interesting stories to talk about. Thank you, as always, to MJ Biz Daily for being such a wonderful provider of news content. And I would highly encourage people to go to their website and read up on what's going on in the world of marijuana. So the first thing, Rob, that we got going on is that, as you know, banks still say no to marijuana. Can't write checks yet. You can't use credit cards. But one of the workarounds apparently had been cashless ATMs. But now it looks like Visa is getting ready to pull the plug on that and is warning it's people out there who are running their ATMs that they need to be very, very careful about the way those ATMs are used and to ensure that they're not being used in a cashless way that violates the terms of service. Sounds like maybe the federal government's putting a little bit of a squeeze on Visa there?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, Visa and the other credit card companies for a long time, their biggest gripe is the fact that from where a transaction happens to where it actually eventually clears, might get pinged through 15 different states. And if any of those states happen to be states that still have, an abject prohibition to cannabis, then technically they're money laundering through that state. And that's always been the issue. It's been the gateways with the credit card companies. I mean, look, at a certain point, it's ridiculous. If these guys are savvy enough, the credit card companies, they should figure out how to say, okay, if I've got a transaction, let's make sure the pings only happen, on contiguous states. You can get across the country at this point. I mean, there's maybe one or two parts of the Midwest that's somewhat like tricky, but there's really no reason you ever have to ping through Kansas or ping through Nebraska. So the whole thing to me is at this point nonsense. It made sense when there's only like 8 or 9 states that were legal, but now that there's 38 states that are legal for medicinal, and half the country is legal for adult. I mean, look, I'm in Utah, man, Utah, and I'm seeing billboards right now for medicinal cannabis delivery services as I drive to the mountain today. Like when I lived here when I was in 1990 and I was slinging bags out of my dorm room, like you went to like the jail sentences were insane for cannabis. And now I'm looking at billboards saying you can buy it. And this is one of the most conservative states in the union. So if Visa can't figure this out, or MasterCard and Discover can't figure this out, I mean, look, guys, it's long past time. Get your shit together and figure out how we're actually going to be able to at least have a safe transaction across the counter that doesn't involve cash. And if your ATM systems were the workaround before, stop trying to shut it down. It's like you're sticking your finger in a dike. It's ridiculous.
Well said. And with good attitude, I like that. It's you're right. It is a very frustrating issue, and you and I both, I'm sure, have so many clients out there for whom this is really such a problem on both ends. Guys who run ATM machines, and a lot of these dispensaries, for whom this is a huge savior to having to collect all of this cash and deal with all of that, and technically being the rules, right? They're not running it through the Fed. It's a direct credit debit type of relationship, which for a long time I think has given people kind of the comfort that that's good cover, and we should really be okay here. But yeah, I do understand the money laundering problems that a company like Visa runs into, and that sucks. But I would much prefer to see them concentrating their energy on how they're going to find a way to be able to do it in those 38 states, and tell the other states, look, it's not going to involve you. If and when you ever come on board and you want the service in your state, let us know, and we'll flip the switch or whatever we have to do, and bring you guys online as well. And that may be easier said than done, I recognize. But nevertheless, I think that it's, everybody says, well, we need medical marijuana, we need adult use. And one of the reasons that's consistently cited is the safety factor. We're taking it off the street, right? We're taking it indoors. We're making it safe. It's a safe transaction. But it's not a safe transaction when you have to walk to the dispensary with $500 in your pocket. And it's not a safe transaction, right? When you don't have an ability to just make a payment that allows nobody to have to hold on to all the cash. And so at the end of the night, the poor guy who runs the dispensary doesn't have to come outside with 3 people in 3 different duffel bags and hope that he's not the one that gets followed by whoever's sitting outside and thinks they may want to do it. And I don't mean to overblow this. We don't hear that much about it, but it does happen from time to time. And why not? There's a lot of cash lying around. And to consistently sit there and say we're not going to alleviate that problem strictly because we have to continue the charade that marijuana is a Schedule I controlled substance and therefore ineligible for any of these types of services seems kind of stupid by now.
Yeah, look, and I'll give you an anecdote on that. I ran a panel last week at the NCIA show in San Francisco, and my panel was on kind of the California market, and I had some of the bigger CEOs of the industry sitting on my stage. And so I did my interview with each one of them prior to going on stage and said, is there anything specifically you want to talk about? And one of them, runs a multi-dispensary operation in California where the principal places of business, was Oakland, and he owns the Bloom dispensaries. And I said, Oakland, it's a great market. It's a terrific cannabis market. And his answer to me is, yeah, when we're not getting robbed, it is. It's like, and I was like, seriously, is it that prevalent? He's like, yeah, we've been robbed like 3 or 4 times. And I said, I knew last year, like during the riots, you were having some issues. He's like, no, man, it's been happening all the time. And the reason it's happening all the time, is because there's cash there. I mean, it's the old adage, like, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is, right? Why do you knock over dispensaries? Because they're sitting on piles of cash, right? If there was nothing in there, and you want to be a drugstore cowboy and go after the weed, okay, I get it. You can probably try to get behind the locked rooms, but what you're going to get is kind of like going to a 7-Eleven where you can only get whatever's available that's not in the drop box, or same thing like a pharmacy. But when you're sitting on that much cash, it is a very, very attractive soft target. And it makes no sense to give that There should be nobody in law enforcement that wants that.
Yeah, it seems so logical, and yet here we are, for some states almost 10 years later. It's really amazing that after all this time, politics, whatever you want to call it, that we haven't been able to get together and really get this issue resolved. And it's a shame to see, that even if we take it as, Visa being put in a position by the federal government or based on its own concerns as to what the federal government might think, you know, Visa shouldn't have to have those concerns either. They shouldn't have to be the heavy in this situation. They should. I would love to see a market where they don't have to worry about it. Sign your ATM deal, go do your ATM. If you want to do cashless for marijuana dispensaries, knock yourself out. As long as you can submit us the proper paperwork at the end of the day, why not?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is from an AML KYC perspective, which is, anti-money laundering, know your customer. Visa shouldn't be the one has to worry about that. It should be the dispensary itself, and they're already taking the risk by making sure they're checking IDs and making sure they're checking medical cards if they need to. At that point, the customer for Visa has already done the AML KYC work. So I mean, I don't want to belabor this point, but at a certain point, this whole thing is ridiculous, and I think we're long past ridiculous now.
I do too. So we agree on that. We'll see what happens, and hope that people come to some common sense and let us move on forward in a more civilized manner. The next story that I saw is this guy who's writing and saying that based on what he's seen, that in states that limit marijuana licenses, the number of marijuana licenses issued, so that's pretty much just about every state except for California, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Oklahoma, right? He said otherwise, it benefits only the multi-state operators who operate in those states. Now, it's fascinating he says that because I've always thought that Illinois was such a fascinating example of the way this market works. I think that pretty much universally people were not impressed with Illinois' medical market, the way the program was run, and the fact that a lot of people barely survived and many didn't survive. But yet, a number of these guys who got licenses in Illinois just to be medical operators in this same market, either by, foresight or, by necessity or, the ability to recognize what they could do, they've set themselves up as some of the largest MSOs in the country right now, right? We got Cresco and GTI and, well, Curaleaf that bought out Grassroots and Pharmacon while it was still here before that was purchased, and Verano, of course, and Revolution, and all of them. There's so many of them here in Illinois, and they're so successful here. So to me, already I look at that and I see that, yeah, that seems to be evidence. Now, I guess in the long run, on a bigger picture, a lot of it plays in more to price control, right? So that in Illinois, where there's a limited market, the price is very, very high. So it drives many customers in Illinois back to the black market, for which there's plenty of marijuana, because as we've talked about, and this guy mentions again, such a large percentage of California's annual crop is sold outside of California. And, but if you have a state, even like Oklahoma, right, where anybody who wants in can get in, then the market takes care of itself on the pricing end. And, people have to compete with real competition. And instead of paying $60 for an eighth of medical in Illinois, you can pick it up for significantly less than that in Oklahoma and in other places, $20, $25 maybe for an eighth. I can certainly understand and see why, at that point, the big guys get favored, because you can't be a small operator. There's not enough of a margin there to be able to keep yourself alive, when you're forced to try and do business at a level that's hard to sustain at. But, maybe that's all part of a grand strategy, which is why those guys are now billionaires and I'm still sitting here practicing law.
Sure, but I mean, let's run that down a little bit further. I mean, if you're asking, would I rather be in a closed market that's going to expand or in a very expansive market that's going to contract? To be a good operator in California, you've got to be good. You've got to be good at your craft. You've got to make great concentrate. You got to grow great cannabis. You have to have great genetics. Same thing is true of Washington, Oregon, Colorado. At a certain point in time, Illinois is going to open up. The big question is whether or not the states that eventually are going to open up, whether or not those companies will be so powerful at that point that it doesn't matter anymore, right? But in theory, if you're a really good operator that can actually win in California, then if you ask a guy like John DeFriel from who does Raw Garden, or you ask the guys from Stizzy, you ask the guys from Jungle Boys, as they think about their brands and they think about moving into these other states, ultimately they think they can compete on any playing field. It doesn't matter where it is, doesn't matter who they're going against. They think they're probably a more important brand long term. And right now, this is fleeting because the second they enter Illinois and they can, like they're able to enter Illinois, they should be able to crush the guys already there based on quality and based on like what they've had to do to be a winner in a really, really competitive open market. So, does it truly inure to the benefit of the big guys in the long term? I would venture to guess, based on everything we've seen, and I'm not going to take anything away from Trulieve, Cresco, GTI, Curaleaf. Those companies will be around for the long term. They're too well capitalized at this point. They're too big. But do I think they'll be the biggest in 5 years? I mean, look back 5 years, and nobody that was huge then is huge now. And go back 5 years before that, same thing. I would expect that those guys that I just mentioned will probably still be top 20 players. But I would think that some of the biggest companies in the really, really competitive free market states will ultimately be able to compete in these other states as they start to expand. So, I agree with the sentiment in the story that you're referencing, that right now it inures to the benefit of the MSO. But I think long term, the free market capitalist society that exists in other states where they've had to duke it out in the trenches, and that you've got to be good to succeed. I think those guys ultimately are the ones that are going to build the best brands.
Well, you're right, and actually, and this author, and if I'm going to keep referring to him, I should give him a name, Van McConnon, who wrote this for MJ Biz Daily. He points out that people have to realize that getting and maintaining a license is a separate skill from successfully running a cannabis business, which is exactly what you were just saying. And that many of these people have only figured out the first part of it, which is how to obtain a license. They haven't figured out the second part of it, which is how to deliver high quality product, at scale sufficient enough to make a living at it. You're absolutely right. Nothing will ever be able to compete with guys who really, really know what they're doing and can really run a good business and can run it in a way to make it affordable.
Yeah. So I think time will tell on that one. I'd love to put a pin in this one and come back to it in a year and a half, 2 years. I'd love to see what happens after, New Jersey opens up their licenses, now that they've awarded new ones. I'd love to see what happens in Massachusetts now that they're still expanding, and see how some of those guys are doing, or even when New York actually goes adult use under Hochul. We're going to see some big changes in some of these very, very confined states as they expand. And I'm really curious to see whether or not the guys that think they can win because they're better capitalized. And I'll give you a great comp here, which is that in Canada, the Canadian LPs were the dominant players for so long. And all those guys now are losing in market share just really, really quickly to the craft boutique guys that are putting out the best product. And they've got two choices. Either they can continue to lose market share, or they can buy them. And a lot of these smaller operators are happy to get bought for, massive gains in order to stave off the inevitable, which is that quality will always win.
Well, that's very true. And that's actually a great segue to this final article that caught our interest, which is just a very quick recap of how the marijuana mergers and acquisitions market absolutely sizzled in 2021 and is poised for a hot 2022. And I know you're very much right in the business, right in the center of that business in that market. What's your as we sit here on the beginning of a new year, looking back, what's your feelings on it? And do you see it possible for this industry to sustain at that level going forward?
Yeah, look, I mean, I came into 2021. I think I said this right in the beginning of the year on the show that I looked at this year as going to be the year of the M&A. It's going to be the M&A. When I categorize what every year is, and I say this year is about planting flags, or this year is about building brands, or this year 2021 was about M&A. I think 2022 is going to be even bigger, simply because the deal sizes are getting larger, and the acquisitions that are happening are happening on a pretty big scale. But if you look at the article that you're referencing on this one, which again was citing a lot of the data that was being put out by our friends at Viridian, some of these are not really cannabis transactions. Like the Jazz Pharmaceuticals purchase of GW Pharma for $7.2 billion, by far the biggest transaction that happened this year. But I mean that's really a pharma deal. It's not a cannabis deal. The biggest one in cannabis in the United States is definitely the Trulieve Harvest merger, and that was a $2.1 billion deal value. But after that, some of the other big ones that were in there, a few of them were Canadian. The Canopy buying Supreme, or Canopy buying Wana. Those were, well, I guess the second one is U.S. and Canadian. But what they're not saying, kind of in this article, is how many deals were priced between, let's call it $50 million and $150 million. And there were tons in this last year. And that's where I think it's really interesting. I mean, for a lot of people, if you build a small brand and you sell your company for $50 million and you still own, even 25, 30% of that business when you sell it, that's life-changing money. That's even after tax, you're walking away north of $10 million in cash, for building a cannabis business and saying, I put 4 or 5 years into this thing and here's a payday. That's a real payday. When you get to the 150, $200 million level, now you're talking about guys that, are trying to figure out, where to build which beach house, and is it Costa Rica or is it, somewhere in the Bahamas? And, those are real exits. And so, everyone talks about all these big MSOs and all these companies where they're still in it and, what they're trying to achieve, but you're forgetting it. There's a lot of guys. I mean, I personally know probably 20 who are done. They've done what they need to do in cannabis. Now they're on to something else, probably not in the same space. They might dabble in the space, but these deals are now large enough where, there's a lot of people that are mid 40s, early 50s that are retired. And that's a really nice thing to see out of the cannabis industry.
Absolutely. It is nice because, again, going back to 2013 when we used to see these projections of where this industry could be, it was always felt like maybe it was a little pie in the sky what they were saying, but the truth is that, these numbers exceed anything I think they ever imagined we would be seeing at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a $91 million transaction get announced last week. Plant 13 buying a 39,000 square foot cultivator in California. That to me is staggering. That with the competition for cultivation in California, for someone to pay $91 million basically for an indoor facility that pumps out some pretty nice weed, but isn't spectacular. There's some real multiples that are still getting paid for businesses just to get the vertical integration in certain states. And in California, like to succeed, everyone's realizing that you can open 4 or 5 retailers, but unless you have the cultivation backbone behind it, you're probably missing a really good piece of the pie to stock your own shelves and have 25, 30% sell through of your own product. So you're still seeing what are decoupled markets going back and saying vertical integration is still where we want to be because we can control the margins all the way through the supply chain. And you're seeing real numbers come out of, if you can get one of those deals, that the numbers are still really attractive.
That's good news. I mean, that's positive, right? And people who want to know whether there's money to be made in this industry, the answer is yes. You just have to know the right deal and know how to find it and work with the right people. But you're right. I mean, it's wonderful to be sitting here and, having these kind of conversations about this industry and just see it getting larger and larger as we go forward and realizing how much more there still is to go. So,
but look, we should also talk about the flip side of that as well, which in some of these states, I'm an old school guy, right? So I feel for my friends up in Humboldt and Mendocino and Lake County and Grass Valley area where these guys are still eking out a living with a small greenhouse, and they paid a huge price to go legal. They're paying much more money. They're making much less money than they used to. They paved the way for this industry, and they're watching these other guys, build out an indoor facility somewhere down in Southern California, reap the benefits of it, while they're still limping along trying to find a way to do this. And they don't ever want to sell out to these big guys. Like for them, they're growers. They want to be growers. That's all they've ever wanted to do with their lives, and they're perfectly content doing it. And they're pretty damn good at it. And so, to watch the industry kind of bury these guys in the process, I gotta say, it's sometimes for me tough that. I've been part of the problem of like building this monster and feeding this monster, but it's been at the expense of a lot of people that paved the way for the people that are now here. That it's being dominated by big business instead by the people that actually built the industry to begin with.
That's a great point, and you know what, and I think that's very important to remember. And we can all be awed by these huge deals as they go down and the large numbers that exchange hands. But there tends to be a lot of focus, I think, on individuals who. Wound up losing everything and going to jail, and an industry, really built on that. But you're right; it's important to just recognize the, I guess what you would call just your everyday marijuana farmer, the people who've just been doing it forever because that's what they do, and make a living off of it. And now all of a sudden, thanks to all these changes in the law, it's not so easy for them to make a living anymore. And while it's easy to say, well, there'll always be another good strain to replace somebody. For those of us that have stumbled around in certain parts of California or Colorado and found the right dispensary at the right time with the right strains, I don't agree with that. That I always want that excitement of, finding a new local something to be out there. And, when you get to the point where the only thing that's available to you is you know, multi-state operator A and multi-state operator B or C, then we're gonna really miss these days.
Yeah, I mean, where do you think these great genetics came from to begin with? The greatest breeders have come out of these areas, and they've been the people that have dedicated their lives to, either finding land-raised strains and crossbreeding, or really spending their time trying to figure out what terpene profiles are going to work and how to actually get there. And these guys they're the mad scientists in our industry. I mean, I look back 30 years ago and think, like, where would we be without like P-Bud, or where would we be without like Headband, and the things that were game changers at the time, like the original OG Kushes, and like how that completely changed everything else that came afterwards. The original diesels. Those guys that were doing this stuff and putting their liberty on the line, and then figuring out and speaking to other guys. Where there was basically a coconut telegraph of really really don't say a word about this unless either or you don't. Those are the guys that created this, and now all of a sudden there's like all this generic stuff out there being done in these massive commercial warehouses that to me is not that interesting. But at the same time, like that's like what's attracting the Wall Street capital, because it's scale. It's no longer craft. And I think we really need to start thinking about how do we support the craft growers again? How do we support the people that are exceptional at what they do? And that speaks to my point earlier of once the market opens up in a lot of these states that right now are closed, I'd like to see those guys come back in and start smashing on some of the bigger people just because their quality's better.
I agree. That would be great to see, no doubt about it. And it's something that would be wonderful for our industry. Let's turn to music, because that's fun too.
I like music.
Love music, so, and I loved, Rob and I were having a friendly little exchange the other day on Christmas Day with respect to fun music to play at home. And the idea that it's always good to get some of the family members out of the house so you can really crank the volume up if you're going to do it, and really appreciate the day. My little thing that I like to do every year on Christmas is listen to the Who's Tommy in one form or another. And this year I was listening to the live version from the Isle of Wight Festival in, I think, 1970. And boy, when you turn it up to the right level and they start belting out some of those tunes, it's just wonderful. And of course, I was equally impressed, Rob, with your choice of was it a 1994 possum?
It was. And the great thing is I've got a 6-year-old son who absolutely loves Fish and loves specific songs. So, being able to turn my entire house into a Sonos concert and just cranking out a 94 possum with him, nothing more fun.
That is excellent. Definitely. When the kids buy in with you and they're happy to be a part of it, it's a wonderful thing. Believe me, I've gone through it a few times now, and I love it. It's really, really nice.
So I'll give you a little music humor for the day, Larry.
Yeah.
I just got a text from a good buddy of mine that was making fun of playing in the sand during the time of coronavirus, with a set list that starts off with "The Mucus Never Stopped," into "A Friend of the Delta," into "It Must Have Been the Rona," to "They Infected Each Other," "Pits of Fools," "Little Red Booster," "Testin," "China Bat Sunflower," into "I Know You're Pfizer."
God love deadheads, man. They're always out there. They're always being creative. That's a wonderful thing.
Saints sneezing, dark PCR. If I had the cure to give, it's just one after the other. Pfizer on the mountain, drum space 6 feet. Unbroken strain, standing on the immune, Stella Chew.
Oh God.
It's comedy that someone actually came up with 3 nights worth of sets based on coronavirus. Like, hey, before you start going back to big concerts, you might want to think about whether or not it's appropriate at this point, watching Omicron kind of, as I said, ravage a lot of the parts of this country right now. Not in terms of hospitalizations, but certainly in terms of what appears to be infection. So I know it's a topic you and I hate talking about in this show because we're here for music and cannabis, but once in a while it does tie in. So I fear I'd at least throw it out there.
No, it does. There's no question about it. And look, once again, everybody's going to do their own thing, make their own choice. I'm not here to, to tell people what to do. Certainly not. But, if there's any belief that, getting people entirely vaxxed up and people to, use masks when appropriate, if for no other reason, just out of respect for the folks around them, who knows? Maybe this would be a lot more under control. Maybe it wouldn't. I'm not an expert and certainly not in a position to say better than anybody else, but that just kind of seems like the logical answer to me. And, but, again, we are where we are, and, there's always going to be, consequences that have to be paid when, certain health standards can't be guaranteed for everybody who might want to participate. And I can't really argue with that. And quite frankly, I give all of these bands credit for, it'd be very easy for them to say, hey, look, the tickets are sold. If people want to show up, that's their business. It's not our problem. But they don't. And then, like Fish, not only do they not, and not only do they do the right thing and step forward and say, we're going to cancel the show. And, so that way people who are nervous but don't want to dare miss our show don't have to worry. And we're still going to play, an entire live show. I mean, that's just a wonderful thing to see when you get that. And it is very inspiring. And I think, and hope that someday down the road, whether we get rid of coronavirus or just learn to live with it or get to a point where we can all go back out and do the things, we want to do again. And, 20 years later, people look back on this period of time and look at all the selflessness and all of the creativity and, the ways that, bands made sure that they stepped in and really did take care of their fans while being conscious of safety, even at their own expense. If you cancel a 4-night run that's completely sold out, that doesn't work very well. So, hats off to Fish and hats off to all of these bands that have been, at the forefront of saying we love to play with people, but we just love you to live too. So
yeah, I'll leave you, before we get back into listening to some more Dead, I'll leave you 3 of my favorites, which is ISO, Sore Throated Wind, and Next Time You See Me.
My God. I mean, seriously, somebody's sitting around thinking that stuff up, and God bless them, because that's wonderful. I love that kind of humor. I'm not going to come up with it, but I'm glad that somebody else does.
It's funny stuff. No, I agree. I mean, look, you got to make light of the situation of just saying, okay, look, we're still dealing with this. We still want to see music. Let's just figure out a way to make ourselves laugh in the process.
If we don't, then, then we don't got a whole lot going for us. So we teased this show a little bit earlier, this Dead show a little bit earlier in this episode. This is a show from January 3rd, 1970, which makes it 52 years old. Forgive me just for a moment as we're focusing on January 3rd that I shout out 2 quick birthday shout outs. Number 1 to my niece Lily in Port Washington, 10 years old today, God love her. And to cool cousin Brent in St. Louis, who's turning, 54, 55. And Brent's the guy in St. Louis who knows everybody. And even up in Chicago, he got me a front row center ticket at Alpine in the 1989 run. And then when Fish blew through St. Louis in 2010 and played at the Fox Theater, he got us box seats to that one too. So cool cousin Brent always pulls his end of the deal. And so we'll give him a quick birthday shout out on his birthday as well. But January 3rd typically would not be a time that the Grateful Dead play, right? I mean,
no, you're done with the New Year's run. You're going home. You're sleeping for a few days.
And unlike Fish, who will alter it to accommodate a weekend, like even this year where they were going to be playing Saturday night as well, so they throw in a show on the, Dead never did it in any of the years that I was around. Everything always just fell when it fell. January 1st was it, and then they were done. Maybe out that way they do some mid to late January shows or whenever Chinese New Year's fell, and then they do a few obviously in February and then start an East Coast tour, and you would never see the Dead on the other side of the country right after the first of the year. So this run is very unique, and a long time ago, once we mentioned on this show that the 1969 New Year's shows into 1970 were actually played in Boston, Massachusetts at a venue called the Boston Tea Party, which has its own legendary status in Boston, I suppose. But the Dead played the 30th and the 31st there of December 69 and did an East Coast New Year's show, which was really unique then and still unique today because it never happened again. Everything else has always been in the Bay Area to the extent that they didn't do a New Year's show, which they did a few times in the 70s. And, then later on, well, certainly now Dead and Company cannot do it. Phil can't do it just because of everything that's happening. But boy, if you lived on the East Coast that year and you had a chance to catch the New Year's shows in Boston, and now they're going to come into New York and do a few shows at the Fillmore East. And like I say, the night before January 2 is the show that's featured on Dave's Picks Volume 30, and well worth listening to. But this show had some good stuff, and we heard that one part of the other one that's just a wonderful tune. I'm going to get Dan really quick here, Rob, to play us another selection from this show, and it's kind of unique. For anyone who's interested in checking this show out on archive.org, track number 15, and this is an early and a late show, so it looks like it's a really, really long show, but it's really two shows. Archive.org does not have the entirety of the early show on January 3rd, but it does have the entirety of the January 3rd show of the late show. So if you look at track number 19, or excuse me, track number 15, which is I Know You Rider coming out of China Cat, and that's great in its own right. But as you get to the end of it, and right before it kicks over into the next song, the Dead have a little bit of stage banter where they introduce the next song. And just to put it in context and so people maybe understand a little bit, the next song they're going to go into is Mason's Children, which I think in their entire time they maybe only played 15 times, a song that was originally supposed to be on Working Man's, I believe, but didn't make it, and for one reason or another. And then after the last time they played it in 1970, I don't think it was played again until Phil Lesh brought it back with the quintet in the early 2000s. So let's listen to this really fast here for a minute, and you'll get the little explanation from the Dead about the tune, and then a little bit of the tune, and then we can come back and talk about it some more. So go ahead, Dan.
The Mason died on Monday. We bricked him in the wall. All his children grew and grew. They never grew so tall before. They may never grow so tall again.
I got to tell you, you tell me if you agree, I love that backbeat or whatever the drummers are doing right before the vocals. It's wonderful. Whatever they're doing, I love it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I love the banter. I mean, stage banter is something that's so rare, especially during that period. But stage banter that's completely off topic, not about like tuning up or trying to make things right or telling people to step back, but just completely off topic, random. Like, no, it was a drive-in movie. No, it was a drive-in. It's just really fun stuff.
It is, and I love the idea that there's this a story behind Mason's Children, even if that's the story that they come up with at the moment. I seem to recall reading somewhere that for a while it had been suggested that it was a little more demonic in intention or something like that, to tie into the Masons and people coming back from the dead or whatever the case may be, and then they tell this story and kind of shut that down. But still only play the song a few more times and then just buried it forever thereafter. And it's a real shame to me. I mean, I think it's a great song. It's got a nice little beat to it. It's silly, almost in a Fish kind of way. And it's too bad that it's a song I would have loved to have seen the Grateful Dead play. And I'm grateful that all different combinations of Dead and Company or Phil and his friends and whoever have brought it back, so that we've actually had a chance to hear it played a few times.
Yeah, as I said, Mason's Children and Viola Lee were the two things that I was most excited to hear brought back. So it's always a pleasure to hear them.
Yeah, and that just a great night, and they're just really firing on all cylinders, and it's great that they play that tune. It's great that they take the time to talk about it, but the playing is just so tight on, and that back percussion that he's doing with the drum, where it's almost like a snare drum, but it's underneath the beat instead of leading into it, and it's just excellent. And as you play through the rest of that tune as well, you get to hear a lot out of it. Some of the other clips on this show that are really great, the entirety of the Cryptical into the other one, and then finally back into Cryptical is awesome. We're going to hear part of that towards the end. The Black Peter is absolutely outstanding, and we've been focusing on that one a lot as a song that was one of those ones that you'd see Jerry getting ready to come out of space, and you have your fingers crossed for Morning Dew, and then it was Black Peter, and I think Black Peter just got a bad rep for that, at least in our generation. And back then, when it's still again such a brand new song, and Jerry's vocals on it are so strong, and Really, really fantastic to hear. And it's totally changed my views on that song. Disappointed in myself that I didn't appreciate it more, when Jerry was the one playing it instead of whoever else I'm going to see do it.
For sure. For sure. Well, wow, man. Always so much fun, Larry. And I gotta think that, it is New Year's time. It's celebratory time. I hope everyone out there has got great plans. Hopefully your plans weren't ruined, going into New Year's. But if you're anywhere on the West Coast, I highly suggest go to the mountains, go skiing, go snowboarding, get out there, do something fun this holiday season. Now that we've all taken some time with family, now let's let loose for a little bit and really celebrate into 2022, which I've got to think is going to be a better year than the last two. I'm convinced that we're about to get a really great year coming.
From your mouth, man, we would all love to see it. I think it would be great. And to see our industry just keep going stronger than ever would be really nice too. So, if we can all get back to live music the way we all know it and love it, that wouldn't be so bad either.
No, I think that'll happen this year as well. Yeah, I truly think that this will be the time where everyone says, okay, a lot of the negativity is behind us. Let's figure out a way to march forward. I always have that kind of feeling going into a new year of just expectations of hoping that this year will be better than the last. I've yet to have a bad year, so I'm not I'm not complaining. But I've got high hopes that 2022, from like a health and safety perspective, from a cannabis perspective, from a live music perspective, I think there's a lot to look forward to in this coming year. So, to everyone out there, before we sign off and listen to the Cryptical and to the other one, a really, really happy New Year to everyone out there listening. Thanks again for a terrific 2021, and we're super fired up to keep doing it for you guys for this next year.
Amen, brother. It's going to be a great time. And so now we'll tab Dan one last time as we head out the door here. And what you're going to get is the end of the almost 10-minute Other One jam as it jumps into Cryptical, and then go on from there. Again, pull it down off of archive or go look for Dave's Picks Volume 30 and listen to as much of it as you can. It's absolutely beautiful music. Happy New Year, everyone. Talk to you next week, and enjoy your cannabis responsibly.
Escaping through the little fields, I came across an empty space. It turned and exploded. There's a bus stop in its place. The bus came by and I got on. That's when it all began. Well, it's Calmonil at the wheel. The bus to never ever land. Coming, coming, coming over. Coming around. Coming over. Coming around. Coming, coming, coming over. Coming around. Coming over. Coming around. When the day ended, with rainbow colors blended, his man remained unbended. He had to die.